Caleb Carter walked into Desai's corner market that afternoon to buy batteries for his little sister's science project, completely unaware that the next 15 minutes would change everything. Officer Brad Kincaid saw a black teenager in a hoodie and decided guilt before asking a single question, turning a simple purchase into a public accusation and an arrest that should never have happened. But there was one critical thing that Kincaid and everyone behind this scheme had failed to discover about the quiet 15-year-old they'd chosen to target. They hadn't just accused an innocent kid. They had unknowingly pulled at a thread that would unravel an entire system of corruption built on lies, manufactured crimes, and stolen childhoods. And Caleb was about to show them exactly what happens when the truth refuses to stay buried. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Caleb Carter pushed through the glass door of Desai's corner market. His backpack hung heavy on one shoulder, stuffed with robotics club notes and a half-finished circuit board he'd been tinkering with during lunch. The familiar chime above the door announced his arrival, and Priya Desai looked up from behind the counter, her face breaking into a warm smile. "Caleb, how was robotics today?" she asked, setting down a clipboard where she'd been tallying inventory numbers. "Pretty good, Ms. Desai. We're finally getting the servo motors to respond properly. Took us 3 weeks, but we figured out the coding issue." Caleb walked down the narrow aisle toward the battery display, his sneakers squeaking slightly on the worn linoleum floor. The store smelled like it always did, a mix of fresh produce, cardboard boxes, and the faint sweetness of the pastries Priya's husband baked every morning. "That's wonderful. Your father must be so proud." Priya wiped down the counter, her movements quick and efficient. She'd owned this market for nearly 8 years, serving the neighborhood with the kind of personal touch that kept customers coming back, even when the big chain store opened 2 miles away. He doesn't really understand the technical stuff, but yeah, he likes hearing about it. Caleb grabbed a pack of AA batteries from the shelf and scanned the granola bars nearby. His little sister Maya had a science project due tomorrow, and she'd texted him during his last class with 3 exclamation points and a crying emoji. The batteries were for her light-up model of the solar system, and the granola bar was her favorite, chocolate chip with sea salt. He brought both items to the counter, fishing his wallet from his jeans pocket. "How's the planning going for that community STEM night you mentioned last week?" Priya's eyes lit up. "Oh, it's coming together. We've got the community center reserved for the 3rd Saturday of next month. I'm trying to get some of the local tech workers to volunteer as mentors. You should bring your robotics project. The younger kids would love to see it." "That'd be cool. I could show them the basic programming. Maybe let them control the movements." Caleb handed over a $10 bill, already imagining how he'd explain the code structure to elementary schoolers without making it too complicated. Priya rang up the items, the register beeping twice. "That'll be $7.43. She took his money, counted out his change, and printed the receipt. As she handed everything over, Caleb stuffed the batteries into his hoodie pocket. They barely fit, creating a noticeable bulge in the fabric, and tucked the granola bar into his backpack side pocket. "Thanks, Ms. Desai. I'll talk to my club sponsor about the STEM night. Maybe we can get a few people to come." "That would be perfect. Oh, and tell your mother I finally found that cookbook she asked about. It came in yesterday." Caleb grinned. "She'll be happy. She's been looking for that one for months." He reached for the receipt Priya had set on the counter, but his backpack strap caught on the edge of a promotional display. As he turned to free it, his hand swept the receipt off the counter. The small paper fluttered down, sliding beneath the candy rack that stood beside the register. "Oh, hang on." Caleb started to kneel down to retrieve it, but the door chime rang again, louder this time, more forceful. Officer Brad Kincaid stepped inside, his hand resting on his belt near his radio. His uniform was crisp, his boots polished to a mirror shine. His eyes swept the store in one practice motion before locking onto Caleb. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Afternoon," Kincaid said, his voice carrying an edge that didn't match the greeting. His gaze fixed on Caleb's hoodie pocket, where the battery pack created an obvious bulge. "Got a call about a possible theft in progress." Priya's smile faded. "Officer, there's no theft. Caleb just purchased." "I'll determine that, ma'am." Kincaid moved closer, his body language shifting from casual to authoritative in an instant. He looked at Caleb with the kind of scrutiny usually reserved for suspects in interrogation rooms. "Son, I need you to empty your pockets. Right now." Caleb's heart kicked up a notch, but he kept his voice steady. "I just bought these batteries. Ms. Desai can confirm. I said empty your pockets." Kincaid's tone sharpened, cutting through Caleb's words like a blade. "Hands where I can see them first." The two other customers in the store, an elderly woman selecting apples and a middle-aged man browsing the magazine rack, both turned to watch. Caleb felt their stares like physical weights. He slowly pulled his hands from his pockets, showing them palm up. "Officer Kincaid, he literally just paid," Priya said, her voice rising slightly. She pointed at the register. "Not 30 seconds ago. I can print another receipt if—" "Where's the receipt then?" Kincaid interrupted, his eyes never leaving Caleb. "It fell onto the rack. I was about to pick it up when you came in." Caleb gestured toward the candy display, but Kincaid stepped between him and the rack. "Convenient." Kincaid reached for his radio, pressing the button. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. About a juvenile suspect detained at Desai's Corner Market, possible theft. Requesting backup for processing." The word suspect hung in the air like poison. Caleb felt his stomach tighten. This wasn't real. This couldn't be happening over batteries and a granola bar he'd paid for. "Officer, please, there's a misunderstanding." Priya moved toward her computer, fingers flying over the keyboard to pull up the transaction history. The screen flickered, then froze. She clicked frantically, but the blue loading wheel just spun endlessly. No, not now." Kincaid's smirk was subtle but unmistakable. "Classic trick. Jam the system, claim the purchase went through, pocket the merchandise. I've seen it a dozen times." "I didn't jam anything." Caleb's voice cracked slightly, frustration bleeding through his careful composure. "The receipt's right there under the rack. Just let me get it. That's enough." Kincaid grabbed Caleb's wrist, his grip firm and deliberate. He spun Caleb toward the counter, pressing his hand flat against the surface. "You need to learn some respect when an officer is conducting an investigation." Outside, visible through the front window, Theo Kim stood on the sidewalk testing his new gimbal stabilizer. He'd been waiting for Caleb, recording random shots of the street to check the settings. The afternoon light was perfect, and he was absorbed in adjusting the tension knobs when he noticed movement inside the store. He glanced up just in time to see Officer Kincaid's hand on Caleb's wrist. Theo's grip tightened on the gimbal. Something was wrong. Inside, Caleb's mind raced. He remembered the sign he'd read on the wall last month while waiting in line, a printed notice about customer rights. According to store policy, customers have the right to request a manager be present during any disputes. "I'm requesting that." Kincaid's jaw tightened. "That's backtalk. You really want to make this harder on yourself?" "I'm not trying to make anything hard. I'm just asking." Step toward the door. "Now." Kincaid's hand moved to Caleb's shoulder, applying pressure. Caleb stumbled forward, his foot catching on the edge of a chip display. The metal rack wobbled, bags of chips cascading to the floor in a loud clatter that made everyone in the store jump. Theo burst through the door, his gimbal already recording. His hand shook slightly, but he kept the lens steady. "Caleb, what's going on?" "Stay back," Kincaid barked, one hand up in a stop gesture while the other remained on Caleb's shoulder. "This is police business. He's my friend. I just want to make sure." "I said stay back." Kincaid's free hand moved toward the handcuffs on his belt, the metal glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Unless you want to join him." Priya came around from behind the counter, her face pale but determined. "Officer, please, let me check the security camera. It'll show the transaction. Just give me a moment." "Security systems down too?" Kincaid's eyebrow raised in mock surprise. "Seems like a lot of technical difficulties happening at once." He gestured toward the DVR unit on the shelf behind the counter. The power LED glowed steady green, but Kincaid shook his head. "Our dispatch checked the feed remotely. Nothing's recording." That was a lie. Priya knew the system was working. She checked it herself that morning after the bread delivery. But something in Kincaid's tone told her that arguing would only make things worse. Theo kept filming, his heart pounding. He noticed something strange in his viewfinder. As Kincaid turned slightly to address Priya, his body angled in a way that positioned Caleb almost directly behind him, creating a blind spot. Theo had watched enough police procedure videos online to know that body cams had limited peripheral vision. Kincaid was positioning himself deliberately. The elderly woman near the apples set down her basket and quietly left, not wanting any part of whatever was unfolding. The man by the magazines pulled out his phone, but whether to record or simply look busy, it was unclear. Caleb's phone buzzed in his back pocket, a distinct pattern. His father's ringtone. Daniel Carter always called twice in quick succession if something was urgent. Otherwise, it could wait. Caleb hesitated. He didn't want his father swooping in like some kind of savior. He wanted to handle this himself, prove he could navigate a situation without the FBI credentials doing the talking for him. But Kincaid's grip on his shoulder had tightened, and there was something in the officer's eyes, a certainty, a kind of satisfaction, that scared Caleb more than the handcuffs. He reached slowly for his phone, keeping his movements visible. "I'm just answering my phone. My dad calling." "Hang up." Kincaid's voice was flat, absolute. "But," I said, "hang up." Kincaid reached for the phone, and in the scuffle to keep it, Caleb's thumb accidentally hit the answer button. Daniel's voice came through, tinny but clear. "Caleb? You okay? Your mom said you'd be." The line went dead as Kincaid pressed the end button and handed the phone back. No outside interference during an investigation. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Backup was arriving. Theo's gimbal captured it all. The sirens, the tension in Caleb's shoulders, the way Priya stood frozen behind her counter with her hands pressed flat against the surface as if trying to hold the whole world steady. The second patrol car pulled up with lights flashing, but no siren. Officer Janet Mills stepped out, younger than Kincaid, her expression neutral as she approached the store. Kincaid met her at the door, speaking in low tones that Caleb couldn't quite make out. Through the window, Caleb could see Kincaid gesturing at him at the store at something down the street. Mills nodded, her hand resting on her radio. Together, they walked Caleb outside. The fresh air hit his face, but it didn't bring relief. Kincaid guided him to the curb and gestured for him to sit. Caleb lowered himself onto the concrete, his hands visible on his knees, exactly as his father had taught him years ago during one of those uncomfortable conversations about how to behave if you're ever stopped. "So here's what we've got," Kincaid said, pulling out a notepad. He stood above Caleb, his posture deliberately dominant. Subject matched a suspect description we received from multiple witnesses regarding a theft ring operating in this area. Upon confrontation, subject became agitated and displayed evasive behavior. "I didn't match any description," Caleb said quietly, his eyes focused on the pavement. "And I wasn't agitated. I was trying to show you my receipt." The receipt that conveniently disappeared. Kincaid scribbled something in his notepad, along with the security footage and transaction record. A silver sedan pulled up across the street, moving with the kind of controlled urgency that suggested the driver had been interrupted mid-task. Dr. Renee Carter stepped out, her heels clicking on the asphalt. She wore slacks and a blazer, having come directly from the university where she'd been preparing lecture notes on cognitive biases and eyewitness testimony. Her eyes scanned the scene in seconds, her son on a curb, an officer looming over him, another officer standing guard, and Theo filming from a careful distance. She approached with measured steps, her face calm, but her eyes sharp. "Officer, I'm Caleb's mother. May I ask what's happening here?" Kincaid looked up from his notepad. "Ma'am, your son is being questioned regarding a theft incident. I'll need you to stand back while we complete our investigation." "Of course." Renee didn't move back. Instead, she angled her body slightly, observing Kincaid's stance, the micro-expressions around his eyes, the subtle sheen of sweat on his upper lip despite the cool afternoon air. She'd spent 15 years teaching forensic psychology, learning to read the tells that separated truth from performance. "May I see the probable cause notes? I'd like to understand the specific complaint." Kincaid's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. This is an ongoing investigation into a theft ring targeting local businesses. We've had reports of organized juvenile shoplifters working this corridor, and your son matched indicators associated with that activity. What indicators specifically? Renee's voice remained pleasant, but her questions were surgical. Behavioral patterns, clothing choices, known associate profiles. I see. Renee glanced at Caleb's hoodie, a plain navy blue from his school robotics club with their logo barely visible on the chest. She looked at his jeans, his worn sneakers, his backpack decorated with a chess club patch. And which known associates are you referring to? That's part of the active investigation. Kincaid shifted his weight, his hand moving to his belt. We have a community mentor who's been tracking these patterns. He'll be able to confirm the connections. The word mentor landed strangely in Renee's ears. She filed it away, a piece of data that didn't quite fit the pattern Kincaid was trying to establish. Theo watched from his position near his car, his gimbal still recording. He'd captured the initial confrontation inside the store, but the angle had been limited. Now he panned slowly, documenting the scene outside. His footage showed something interesting. When Kincaid had turned to speak with Officer Mills, his body had angled away from his own body cam, positioning himself so the device's lens pointed more toward the street than toward Caleb. Theo didn't know if that was intentional, but it felt wrong. Inside the store, Priya finally managed to restart her POS system. The screen flickered to life, and she immediately navigated to the transaction history. There it was, time-stamped 3 minutes before Officer Kincaid's arrival. Customer, cash. Items, battery 4 PKA, granola bar chalk. Total, $7.43. Her finger hovered over the print button, but when she pressed it, the printer whirred and produced only a half-printed sheet. The ink had smeared, and an error code flashed on the printer's tiny display. She stared at the mangled receipt, her hands shaking. The timestamp was there, barely legible through the streaks of ink, but it looked suspicious, like something that could have been manipulated. She grabbed the paper anyway, along with the community event flyer Caleb had handed her earlier when he'd first walked in, and hurried outside. Officer, I have the transaction record. Priya held up the half-printed receipt, her voice wavering slightly. And this flyer Caleb gave me when he arrived. He came in to buy supplies, just like he said. Kincaid glanced at the smudged paper and shook his head. Ma'am, I appreciate your cooperation, but a damaged receipt doesn't constitute proof of purchase. In fact, it raises more questions about system tampering. I didn't tamper with anything. Priya's voice cracked. The printer has been glitchy all week. I've been meaning to call the repair service. Unfortunately, that's not something I can verify right now. Kincaid took the receipt from her hand, examining it with exaggerated scrutiny. I'll include this in my report, but given the circumstances, the missing original receipt, the system malfunctions, the subject's behavior, I have enough cause to bring him in for further questioning. Renee stepped closer to Caleb, her presence a shield. She texted quickly with one hand, her thumb flying over the screen. The message went to a colleague at the university, someone who'd worked with law enforcement consultations and knew people at Internal Affairs. The text was simple. Need eyes on an interaction. Officer Kincaid, Desai's Corner Market. Something's off. The response came within seconds. I'll ping Lieutenant Bennett. She's been tracking some patterns. Watch for the word mentor again. Means something. A plain gray sedan pulled up behind Renee's car. Daniel Carter stepped out wearing jeans and a casual button-down shirt. No badge visible, no indication of his role as special agent in charge of the local FBI field office. He walked toward the scene like any concerned father would, alert but not aggressive, present but not confrontational. His eyes met Renee's first. She gave him a subtle nod, then glanced at Kincaid. Daniel understood immediately. He'd been in law enforcement long enough to read a scene in seconds, to separate protocol from performance. This was the latter. Good afternoon, officer, Daniel said, his voice even. I'm Caleb's father. Can you help me understand what's happening here? Kincaid sized up Daniel with a quick glance, saw civilian clothes, a calm demeanor, no obvious threat. Your son is being detained for questioning related to a theft investigation. We're in the process of verifying some information. I see. Daniel crouched down beside Caleb, putting himself at eye level with his son. You okay? Caleb nodded, not trusting his voice. Daniel stood and turned to Kincaid. Officer, my son mentioned he purchased items from this store. Has there been an opportunity to review the security footage? The DVR system appears to be malfunctioning, Kincaid replied smoothly. Coincidentally, around the same time as the register issues the owner mentioned. Daniel glanced at the store window. Through the glass, he could see the DVR unit on the shelf, its power LED glowing steady green. He said nothing, but he noted it. He noted everything. The angle of Kincaid's body cam, the way Officer Mills stood slightly apart, as if distancing herself from her partner's approach, the way Kincaid's language had shifted from casual to rehearsed. Would it be possible to wait while the system is checked? Daniel asked. I'm sure Ms. Desai would be willing to call her service technician. Unfortunately, we can't delay an investigation based on technical difficulties that may or may not be resolved. Kincaid flipped his notepad closed with a snap. I'm authorizing transport downtown for processing pending confirmation from our community liaison. Standard procedure for juvenile theft ring cases. Theft ring. Daniel's tone remained calm, but his eyes sharpened. That's a significant allegation. What evidence supports that classification? Evidence gathered through ongoing investigation. I'm not at liberty to discuss operational details. Daniel nodded slowly, processing the deflection. Then I'll be riding with my son to the station. As his parent, I have that right. Kincaid's expression flickered. Irritation quickly masked. That's not standard. Actually, it is, Renee interjected softly. Family Code Section 12-41. A parent may accompany a minor during any custodial transport unless officer safety is compromised. Is officer safety the concern here? The question hung in the air. Kincaid had no reasonable answer that wouldn't expose his lack of actual cause. Fine, but no interference. As Kincaid moved toward his patrol car to arrange transport, a black SUV turned the corner at the end of the block. It rolled slowly, windows tinted dark, and came to a stop near the intersection. The back window lowered just enough for a face to be visible. Councilman Victor Hale, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expression unreadable. He looked directly at Officer Kincaid and gave a single, deliberate nod. Kincaid's shoulders stiffened. His hand moved to his radio, then dropped. He turned back to Caleb, his jaw set in a hard line. Daniel saw the exchange. He didn't know who was in the SUV, but he knew a signal when he saw one. Something larger was in motion, something that extended beyond a teenager and a pack of batteries. He pulled out his phone and sent a text to SSA Olivia Grant, his most trusted deputy at the Bureau. Need background work. Quiet. Officer Brad Kincaid, local PD. Cross-reference with any federal grant programs, community initiatives. Flag, anything unusual. Theo's gimbal captured the SUV, though from his angle, he couldn't see inside. But he got the license plate, and he got Kincaid's reaction. He didn't know what it meant yet, but he knew enough to keep recording. Officer Mills approached Kincaid, speaking in a low voice. Brad, maybe we should let IA take a look at this before we transport. The parents are lawyered up, and if the DVR's not an issue, Kincaid cut her off. We've got enough for questioning. Let's move. Caleb was guided into the back of the patrol car, his father sliding in beside him. Renee followed in her own vehicle, her mind already organizing the sequence of events into a timeline she could present if needed. Priya stood on the sidewalk, clutching the smudged receipt and the community flyer, her store behind her, her faith in the system cracking like ice under weight. And Theo, still filming, whispered to himself, "What the hell is going on?" The patrol car pulled away from the curb, lights flashing, but no siren. The black SUV waited until the cruiser passed, then made a U-turn and disappeared in the opposite direction. The street returned to its ordinary rhythm. Cars passing, pedestrians walking, the sun inching toward the horizon. But nothing was ordinary anymore. A line had been crossed, and everyone present knew it. The question wasn't whether there would be consequences. The question was who would face them, and how far the truth would have to travel before it found light. The patrol car's journey to the station took 12 minutes, but to Caleb it felt like an hour. Daniel sat beside him in silence, his hand resting on his son's shoulder, a steady pressure that said, "I'm here," without words. Through the metal mesh separating the back seat from the front, Caleb could see Officer Kincaid's eyes in the rearview mirror, watching, calculating. When they arrived, the station's fluorescent lights seemed harsher than daylight. Kincaid led them through a side entrance, past a bulletin board cluttered with wanted posters and community event flyers, into a gray hallway that smelled of burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. Officer Mills walked behind them, her radio crackling with dispatch chatter. At the intake desk, a tired-looking sergeant looked up from his computer. "What view we got, Kincaid?" "Juvenile detention for questioning. Suspected involvement in an organized shoplift crew." Kincaid pulled out his notepad, flipping pages. "Found him at Desai's corner market with stolen merchandise. Store owner's records were compromised, security system conveniently offline." The sergeant's eyebrows rose slightly. "Organized crew? That's a pretty serious jump from shoplifting batteries. It's part of a larger pattern we've been tracking." Kincaid's voice carried the weight of authority, the kind that discouraged questions. "I'm waiting on confirmation from our community liaison." Daniel noticed the language shift immediately. What started as theft had become suspected involvement in organized crime. The escalation was deliberate, designed to justify the detention and create a paper trail that looked legitimate. He'd seen it before, not often, but enough to recognize the pattern. The sergeant typed slowly, entering information into the system. "Parents present. Right here," Daniel said, stepping forward. "Daniel Carter. This is my son, Caleb. I'd like to understand the specific charges being filed." "It's an investigative hold at this point, sir. No formal charges yet." The sergeant glanced at Kincaid, then back at a screen. "We'll get this sorted out as quickly as possible." Renee arrived moments later, her heels clicking purposefully down the hallway. She carried her briefcase and her phone, both held like weapons she knew how to use. She positioned herself where she could see Caleb's face, reading his stress levels, his breathing patterns, the micro expressions that told her he was scared but holding together. "Caleb, remember what we talked about," she said softly. "Breathe. Observe. You're not alone." He nodded, drawing strength from her presence. A door opened at the far end of the hallway, and a man emerged who made Daniel's instincts flare. He was in his late 40s, wearing an expensive leather jacket over a polo shirt, his smile too wide and too practiced. He carried a tablet under one arm and moved with the confidence of someone who believed he belonged everywhere. "Ah, Officer Kincaid. Good timing." The man extended his hand to Kincaid, then turned to assess Caleb with eyes that cataloged and dismissed in the same glance. "I'm Desai. I run the Youth Opportunity Network, community mentorship, and diversion programs. I understand we have a situation here." Kincaid's posture relaxed slightly. "Mr. Sykes, thanks for coming. This is the juvenile I mentioned. We need confirmation on whether he's connected to the crew you've been tracking." Sykes pulled up something on his tablet, swiping through screens with theatrical precision. "Let me check our records. We've been working closely with local businesses to identify patterns, you know. Prevention and intervention. That's our mission." He looked up at Caleb, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Son, have you participated in any after-school programs recently? Maybe some of the community outreach sessions down on Maple Street?" "No," Caleb said quietly. "I'm in robotics club and chess club." "That's it. Robotics." Sykes tapped his tablet. "We've had some issues with kids from various technical programs. Smart kids, but sometimes they get pulled into schemes by older teens. You know how it goes. Someone offers easy money, says it's just borrowing, not stealing." Daniel's jaw tightened. Sykes was building a narrative out of nothing, connecting dots that didn't exist. And he was good at it. The kind of smooth operator who could make fiction sound like established fact. "Mr. Sykes, you're saying my son is involved in some kind of criminal operation?" Renee's voice was scalpel sharp. "Based on what evidence?" Sykes held up his hands in a calming gesture. "I'm not accusing anyone, ma'am. I'm simply here to help Officer Kincaid determine if there are connections." We work with dozens of at-risk youth, and patterns emerge. Sometimes a kid looks clean on paper, but has associations we've flagged. What associations? Daniel asked. Well, that's confidential program information. Privacy protections, you understand. Sykes smiled again, this time with a hint of condescension. But I can tell you we've seen a spike in coordinated thefts along this commercial corridor. Officer Kincaid is doing exactly what he should, being thorough. Daniel noticed Sykes' watch, a Tag Heuer, expensive, the kind given as gifts at high-end fundraisers. He'd seen dozens like it at bureau events and political donor dinners. The watch alone didn't mean anything, but combined with the polished presentation and the vague references to programs and patterns, it painted a picture of someone who operated in the space between legitimate community work and something murkier. Kincaid pulled out his phone, tapping through to his bodycam footage. I'm uploading the incident video now. It'll be in the system within a few minutes. Renee leaned slightly to see the phone screen. She caught a glimpse of the timestamp. The recording started mid-confrontation, with Caleb already at the counter, his voice raised slightly in protest. The first 2 minutes were missing. Officer Kincaid, the video seems to start after you entered the store. Is there earlier footage? Kincaid didn't look up from his phone. The camera had a power cycle issue. Happens sometimes when a unit bumps against something. It rebooted automatically. How convenient, Renee said, her tone flat enough to convey disbelief without triggering defensiveness. Lieutenant Nora Bennett, monitoring from her office on the 3rd floor, made a note in her digital file. Kincaid, second body cam gap in 3 weeks. Request audit of equipment logs and compare with incident reports. She'd been tracking patterns for months, waiting for enough threads to pull. This case was starting to look like the loose thread she needed. In the intake area, Caleb was led to a bench along the wall. Daniel sat beside him while Renee positioned herself where she could observe the entire room. Across from them, a whiteboard displayed a list of recent incidents. Shoplifts, mostly, with dates and amounts scrawled in blue marker. Several names had been erased, but the ghost outlines remained visible under the harsh light. The amount seemed unusually high for petty theft. $40, $65, $93. Figures that suggested either very bold shoplifters or inflated reports. Renee pulled out her phone and snapped a quick photo of the board before anyone noticed. Down the hall, Theo sat in his car outside the station, his gimbal balanced on the passenger seat. He'd followed at a distance, not sure what else to do. Now he reviewed his footage, scrubbing through the frames slowly. There, that moment when Kincaid turned to speak with Officer Mills. The body angle was unmistakable. Kincaid had positioned himself deliberately to keep Caleb out of his body cam's primary field of view. Theo's hands shook as he exported the clip to his laptop. He wanted to post it immediately to flood social media with evidence of what he'd seen. But something held him back. Maybe caution, maybe the memory of his father's advice. Having the truth isn't enough. You need people ready to hear it. He opened a new message to Renee instead. I have footage showing Kincaid's body cam positioning. Looks deliberate. What should I do? Her reply came seconds later. Hold it. Don't post anything yet. Timing matters. We need legal advice first. Back inside, Priya Desai pushed through the station's front entrance, clutching a folder against her chest like armor. She'd spent the last 20 minutes digging through her store's office, a cramped space barely larger than a closet, searching for anything that could help. She'd found the jammed receipt stub, still bearing the faint time stamp, and the community STEM night flyer Caleb had given her. Her hands trembled as she approached the desk sergeant. Excuse me, I need to speak with someone about Caleb Carter. I'm Priya Desai. I manage the store where the incident occurred. The sergeant looked up, his expression neutral. You'll need to speak with the investigating officer. That's Kincaid. He's in the back. Can you get him, please? I have evidence that proves Caleb paid for the items. The sergeant picked up his phone, spoke briefly, then nodded toward the hallway. He'll be out in a minute. Priya waited, her heart hammering. She'd never been good with confrontation, preferring to keep her head down and her business running smoothly. But watching Caleb be treated like a criminal for something he hadn't done had ignited something in her, a refusal to be complicit in injustice, even through silence. Kincaid emerged from the hallway, Sykes trailing behind him. "Ms. Desai, what can I do for you?" She held out the folder. "I have the receipt stub. It's damaged because my printer had an error, but the timestamp is visible. And I have this flyer that Caleb gave me when he first entered the store, before any alleged theft could have occurred." Kincaid took the folder, examining the contents with an expression that bordered on amusement. A partially printed receipt and a flyer. "I appreciate you bringing these, but they don't really establish proof of purchase. The receipt's too damaged to verify authenticity, and a flyer just proves he was in the store at some point, not that he paid for merchandise. But the timestamp could be altered. These POS systems are notoriously easy to manipulate if you know what you're doing." Kincaid handed the folder back. "Look, I understand you want to help, but you might not be seeing the full picture. We're dealing with a coordinated operation. Kids come in, make small purchases to establish a pattern, then pocket bigger items once they've built trust. It's textbook." Priya's face flushed. "Caleb isn't running some operation. He's a good kid who buys batteries and granola bars and talks about science projects. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to calm down." Kincaid's voice hardened just enough to signal the conversation was ending. "If you have concerns about your store's security, I suggest you upgrade your systems. In the meantime, we're conducting a thorough investigation." Sykes stepped forward, his smile diplomatic. "Ms. Desai, I understand this is stressful, but sometimes people we think we know can surprise us. I've worked with hundreds of kids over the years, and the ones who seem most innocent are sometimes the ones who've learned to hide things best. It's not your fault if you missed the signs." The implication was clear. Priya was being positioned as naive, as someone whose testimony couldn't be trusted because she'd been duped. She wanted to scream, to throw the folder in their faces, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I'd like to file a formal statement. On record." "Of course." Kincaid gestured to a side office. "Officer Mills will take your statement. But I should warn you, filing a false statement to protect a suspect can have legal consequences." The threat was delivered with a smile, but it landed like a fist. Priya's hands shook as she signed the statement form Officer Mills provided, recounting exactly what she'd witnessed. Mills typed efficiently, her expression unreadable. When Priya finished, she looked at Mills directly. "Do you believe me?" Mills met her eyes for a long moment, then glanced toward the door where Kincaid waited. "I'm documenting everything you said. That's my job." It wasn't an answer, but it was enough to tell Priya that Mills had her own doubts. Meanwhile, in the intake area, ADA Claire Whitman arrived with a leather portfolio and an expression that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else. She was known for running a tight ship, for hating wasted time, and for having a conviction rate that made defense attorneys wince. She pulled Kincaid aside, her voice low but sharp. "Walk me through this. And I want specifics, not generalities." Kincaid launched into his narrative. The call about possible theft, Caleb's suspicious behavior, the missing receipt, the system malfunctions, the connection to a larger juvenile crime ring. He painted it all with confident brushstrokes, each detail reinforcing the next. Claire listened without interrupting, then flipped open her portfolio. "Show me the body cam footage. It's uploading to the system now. Should be available in a few minutes." "I'll wait." Claire's tone made it clear that wasn't a suggestion. When the footage finally appeared on the system, Claire watched it twice, her expression growing more skeptical with each viewing. The video started with Caleb mid-sentence, his voice elevated but not aggressive. The context was missing. The preceding moments, whatever had triggered the confrontation, were gone. "Where's the beginning?" she asked. "Power cycle. Technical glitch." "Uh-huh." Claire made a note. "And the alleged organized crew? Where's the supporting documentation?" Kincaid gestured to Sykes. "Mr. Sykes has been coordinating with us. He maintains records of at-risk youth and patterns of behavior. I need to see those records." Sykes smiled apologetically. Most of that information inside the room, Kincaid slid a photo across the table. A group of teenagers in hoodies standing outside a convenience store. The image was grainy, pulled from a security camera. "Tell me who recruits the kids." Caleb studied the photo. One face looked familiar. Marcus Williams, a kid who'd been in robotics club last semester but dropped out suddenly. Caleb remembered Marcus mentioning something about needing money, about finding easier work. I know him, Caleb said, pointing to Marcus. He used to be in robotics, but he quit. I don't know anything about recruiting. But you know him. You've talked to him. Yeah, in passing. We weren't close. Kincaid leaned back, his expression calculating. Here's the thing, Caleb. I think you're a smart kid who got in over his head. Maybe someone approached you, offered you money to help coordinate things. You're good with technology. That's valuable to an operation like this. If you cooperate now, tell me who's running the show, I can help you. But if you stay quiet and protect them, you go down with the ship. It was a classic interrogation tactic. Offer a lifeline while implying guilt. Caleb recognized it from the crime documentaries he'd watched with his father. I'm not protecting anyone because there's no one to protect. I bought batteries. That's all. Then why did the store owner's systems malfunction at the exact moment you were there? I don't know. Maybe because the systems are old and glitchy, like she said. Kincaid smiled. Or maybe because someone knew how to disrupt them. From the hallway, Renee listened to the exchange, her mind cataloging every tactic Kincaid employed. He was fishing, using leading questions and implied connections to manufacture a narrative. It was textbook manipulation, and it was failing because Caleb had nothing to give him. 2 floors above, Lieutenant Nora Bennett received a message from her tech specialist. Hallway cameras show Kincaid entering the station with Carter. Body cam signal drops off at the entrance, comes back 3 minutes later. Gap doesn't match the timing of a standard power cycle. Bennett typed a response. Preserve all footage. Flag the body cam for audit. I want equipment logs for the past 6 months. She pulled up Kincaid's record. Commendations, clean evaluations, no formal complaints. On paper, he was a model officer. But paper didn't show patterns, and Bennett had learned to trust patterns over polish. She opened a new file. Investigation into Officer Brad Kincaid. Preliminary. Allegations. Selective body cam usage. Potential evidence manipulation. Questionable detention practices. Status. Active. Confidential. Down the hall, Daniel stood in the bathroom, washing his hands and checking that he was alone. He pulled out his phone and typed carefully. Olivia. Expand the search. I need to know if there's a connection between Kincaid's arrest patterns and businesses in financial distress. Look for common threads, suppliers, creditors, anything that ties them together. The pieces were starting to assemble in his mind, forming a picture that was larger and uglier than a single bad cop. This was organized. This was deliberate. And someone at the top was coordinating it. Back in the interrogation room, Kincaid slid another photo across the table, this time showing Caleb's school. Your chess club meets on Thursdays, right? Same building as the computer lab. Yeah. So the computer lab has been flagged for unusual network activity. Someone's been accessing secure databases, downloading information about local businesses, addresses, security system types, employee schedules. Caleb's stomach dropped. I've never done that. But you have access. You're part of the tech-savvy crowd. Maybe you didn't do it directly, but you knew it was happening. I didn't know anything was happening because nothing was happening. Caleb's voice rose slightly, frustration bleeding through his control. Careful, Kincaid warned. Losing your temper doesn't help your case. From the doorway, Daniel's voice cut through the tension. This interview is over. Kincaid looked up, irritation flashing across his face. We're in the middle of a fishing expedition with no evidence and a lot of speculation. Daniel stepped into the room, his presence shifting the entire dynamic. My son has answered your questions. Unless you're charging him with something specific, we're leaving. Kincaid stood slowly. I can hold him for 24 hours pending investigation, then charge him or release him. But this particular conversation is done. For a long moment, the two men faced each other, Kincaid with his badge and authority, Daniel with the quiet certainty of someone who'd stared down worse. Finally, Kincaid nodded curtly. He stays in the building. I'm not finished with my investigation. As they left the interrogation room, Sykes appeared in the hallway, his tablet clutched against his chest. He made a quick call, his voice low. Yeah, it's me. The kid's parents are pushing back hard. Father's law enforcement, federal, I think. This might get complicated. On the other end of the line, Councilman Victor Hale sat in his downtown office, gazing out at the city lights. Keep the pressure on. We need documented incidents for the grant presentation Friday. If Kincaid can't close this one, find another angle. Sykes, I'm counting on you. Understood. Hale ended the call and opened his laptop, reviewing a PowerPoint presentation titled Youth Safety Initiative, Year 2 Funding Proposal. Slide 7 displayed a chart showing a dramatic uptick in juvenile crime rates. All documented, all time-stamped, all perfectly aligned with the grant success metrics. All fabricated. Outside the station, the evening had deepened into night. Theo still sat in his car, his laptop screen glowing in the darkness. He'd been organizing his footage chronologically, cross-referencing timestamps with Caleb's text from earlier in the day. The timeline was damning. Caleb had texted him heading to the store. At 4:17 p.m., Theo's exterior footage showed Caleb entering at 4:19. The transaction timestamp on Priya's recovered receipt read 4:21. Kincaid's bodycam footage started at 4:23, 2 full minutes after the purchase. 2 missing minutes that told the real story. Theo created a rough cut. Nothing fancy, just the facts laid out with timestamps visible. He saved it to an encrypted drive and sent Renee a message. I think I can prove the body cam was turned off deliberately. The timestamps don't match. Renee read the message and smiled grimly. The walls were starting to close in on Kincaid. Not because of dramatic revelations, but because of small, precise facts that couldn't be explained away. Inside, Daniel finally revealed his credentials to Lieutenant Bennett in a quiet corner away from prying eyes. He kept his badge in his wallet, not flashing it dramatically, just showing it with quiet authority. I'm not here to take over your investigation, Lieutenant. But whatever this is, it's more than one cop making bad calls. It's coordinated, and it's tied to something bigger. Bennett studied his credentials, then met his eyes. I've been tracking patterns for months. Kincaid's not alone. There are at least 2 other officers who show similar gaps in their body cam footage during juvenile stops. All near businesses that later show up on grant applications for a youth diversion program run by Daryl Sykes. Funded by a coalition led by Councilman Hale. Daniel nodded slowly. Then we have the same target. Let's make sure we build this right. Bennett extended her hand. Welcome to the ugliest case I've worked in 15 years. As they shook hands, Caleb sat on a bench with his mother, exhausted but unbowed. Renee wrapped her arm around his shoulders. You did well. You stayed calm. You told the truth. That's all you can do. What if the truth doesn't matter? Caleb asked quietly. It always matters. Sometimes it just takes longer to matter than we'd like. She kissed the top of his head. But we're not done yet. Not by a long shot. Across the room, Kincaid conferred with Sykes, both men's faces tight with frustration. They'd expected an easy win. A scared teenager, compliant parents, a case that closed quietly. Instead, they'd walked into something that was starting to look like a fight. And the fight was just beginning. 2 hours after midnight, Daniel sat in Lieutenant Bennett's office with the door closed and the blinds drawn. The building had quieted to skeleton crew operations, a dispatcher on a night shift, 2 patrol units on the street, and the hum of HVAC systems cycling stale air. Bennett spread 3 folders across her desk, each containing documentation that painted a picture neither of them wanted to see, but both recognized as truth. Here's what we're working with, Bennett said, tapping the first folder. Kincaid has conducted 17 juvenile stops in the past 4 months. 14 involved businesses within a 3-block radius of establishments that later appeared on grant applications submitted by Sykes' Youth Opportunity Network. 6 of those stops show body cam gaps ranging from 90 seconds to 4 minutes. Daniel leaned forward, studying the map she'd marked with red pins. The pattern was unmistakable, a deliberate clustering around specific commercial corridors. And the businesses themselves? Most are struggling. Behind on rent, supplier debts piling up, vulnerable to pressure. Bennett opened the second folder. 3 store owners have complained informally about being approached by someone. Description matches a man who works as Hale's fixer, offering community protection partnerships in exchange for cooperation with youth intervention statistics, which means staging incidents, or turning a blind eye when Kincaid manufactures them. Bennett's jaw tightened. I've been building this quietly for 8 weeks. Your son's case is the first one with multiple witnesses, video evidence, and parents who won't be intimidated. Daniel nodded slowly. So we use it. We apply pressure through the chain of custody. If we force them to produce the store's DVR footage, someone in the pipeline will try to intercept or alter it. That's when we catch them in the act. Risky. If they're smart enough to destroy the evidence before we can preserve it, they won't destroy it. They'll try to edit it, make it support their narrative. That takes time and leaves digital fingerprints. Daniel pulled out his phone, checking a message from Olivia. My deputy just sent preliminary findings. Hale's donor network includes 2 city council members and the deputy chief of your department. Bennett's expression hardened. Deputy Chief Morrison. I've suspected he was running interference, but I couldn't prove it. Now we know why. He's protecting the pipeline. Daniel stood, pacing the small office. Here's what I'm thinking. We keep Caleb safe, we document everything, and we set a trap. Let them think they're still in control while we tighten the net. What kind of trap? The DVR. Tomorrow morning, you formally request the store footage as part of the evidence chain. Make it official, make it loud. See who scrambles. Bennett smiled grimly. And while they're scrambling, we monitor their communications. Exactly. Across town, in the Carter family home, Caleb sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and a pen. Renee had suggested he write his own statement. Not a legal document, but a detailed account of exactly what happened, written in his own words with the precision he usually reserved for robotics blueprints. The act of writing helped organize his thoughts, transformed the chaos of the day into something structured and manageable. He described the shelf where the receipt fell, noted the exact wording on the customer rights policy sign, documented the time on his phone when he'd entered the store. Every detail mattered. Every fact was a brick in the wall of truth he was building. Renee read over his shoulder, occasionally asking clarifying questions. What did you notice about Officer Kincaid's tone when he first spoke to you? Caleb paused, thinking. It wasn't questioning. It was accusing, like he'd already decided I was guilty and was just going through the motions. Good. That's important. Renee made a note in her own journal. Authority figures who've already reached a conclusion before gathering evidence reveal their bias through tone and body language. You picked up on that. Mom, do you think this is really about me? Or is it about something bigger? Renee set down her pen and met her son's eyes. It's about both. You were targeted because you fit a profile in Kincaid's mind. Young, black, in a hoodie. But the reason he was so aggressive, the reason he manufactured evidence, that's part of something larger. They're using kids like you to generate statistics for funding. That's insane. That's corruption. And it's why we're going to stop it. Meanwhile, Theo had been working through the night in his bedroom, his desk cluttered with energy drink cans and snack wrappers. He'd created a split-screen comparison. On the left, his exterior footage of the store with timestamps visible. On the right, a blank space where Kincaid's body cam footage should align. He'd added a third panel showing the shadows cast by the afternoon sun, proving the angle and demonstrating how a person standing in Kincaid's exact position could deliberately shield their body cam from the store security camera. It was circumstantial, but it was compelling. He'd even recreated the scene the following evening, standing in the same spot at the same time, filming himself turning at different angles to show how body cam visibility changed based on body position. His phone buzzed. A text from Renee. Don't post anything yet. We need your footage, but timing is critical. Can you come by the house tomorrow morning? Theo replied immediately. I'll be there. I have something that shows his positioning was deliberate. The next morning arrived with gray skies and the promise of rain. Daniel had managed 3 hours of sleep, Renee, perhaps 2. Caleb came downstairs looking tired but determined, his notebook tucked under his arm like a talisman. Theo arrived at 8 o'clock sharp, his laptop bag slung over his shoulder. In the Carter living room, he set up his computer and walked them through his analysis. The footage was damning. Not flashy, not dramatic, just methodical documentation of facts that couldn't be explained away as coincidence. "This is excellent work," Daniel said, watching the comparison for the third time. "You've established a pattern of deliberate positioning. That speaks to intent. Do you think it'll be enough?" Theo asked. "In combination with everything else, yes. But we need more." Daniel pulled up a message from Olivia on his phone. "My colleague ran Kincaid's arrest patterns against business financial records. Every store where he's made a juvenile arrest in the past 4 months shares the same primary supplier, a distribution company that's 60% owned by a holding group connected to Councilman Hale." Renee looked up sharply. "So Hale has financial leverage over these businesses, and he uses that leverage to coerce cooperation. They participate in the statistics generation, or they lose their supplier contracts. Classic extortion dressed up as community partnership." Theo's eyes widened. "This is way bigger than I thought." "It always is," Daniel said quietly. Across town, Priya Desai opened her store at 7 a.m., her hands still shaking from the previous night's confrontation. She'd barely slept, replaying the conversation with Kincaid and Sykes over and over, analyzing every word for hidden threats. She called her cousin who worked in IT, explained the POS system failure, and together they'd managed to recover the corrupted transaction log onto a USB drive. The recovered data was clean, timestamp, item codes, transaction total, all matching exactly what Caleb had purchased. The error hadn't been tampering. It had been a genuine printer malfunction, the kind that happens when ink cartridges get low and paper feeds jam. But the timing had made it look suspicious, and Kincaid had weaponized that suspicion. She tucked the USB drive into her pocket and called Lieutenant Bennett's direct line, a number Officer Mills had quietly written on the back of a business card the night before. "Lieutenant Bennett, this is Priya Desai. I manage the store where Caleb Carter was arrested yesterday. I have recovered transaction data that proves he paid for his items. I'd like to submit it formally. Can you bring it to the station this morning? Say 10 o'clock. I'll be there." Bennett ended the call and immediately sent a message to her tech specialist. "Prepare to receive and authenticate a USB drive containing POS transaction logs. I want hash verification, metadata analysis, and timestamp authentication. Document every step." The trap was being set piece by piece. At 9:30, Bennett formally requested the DVR footage from Desai's corner market as part of the evidence chain for the Carter case. She filed the request through official channels, copied ADA Whitman, and made sure Deputy Chief Morrison received notification. The request was procedural, routine, impossible to ignore. Within 20 minutes, Morrison called her office. "Nora, what's the status on this Carter juvenile case? I'm hearing it might be part of a larger investigation." "That's correct, sir. We're documenting everything thoroughly." Good. Just make sure we're not overreaching. I'd hate to see resources wasted on a simple shoplifting incident that could be resolved with a diversion program. "I understand, sir. But given the evidentiary questions, I think we need to be comprehensive." "Of course. Keep me informed." Morrison's tone carried a weight that suggested the conversation wasn't really about information sharing. It was about control. Bennett noted the time of the call, 9:47 a.m. She'd bet her pension that within an hour, someone would make a move on that DVR footage. She was right. At 10:30, a man in a ball cap, the same fixer who'd warned Priya the night before, entered Desai's corner market. The store was quiet, just 2 customers browsing the refrigerated section. The man walked to the counter with the confidence of someone who believed he had authority. "Morning. I'm here to collect your security system's DVR for a police investigation." Priya's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. "Do you have documentation? A warrant or official request form?" "It's all being processed. This is just a preliminary collection to preserve the evidence. You know how it is. Red tape and paperwork take time, but we need to move fast to make sure nothing gets corrupted or overwritten. I'll need to see identification and official paperwork before I can release anything." The fixer's smile thinned. "Ma'am, I'm trying to help you here. If that evidence gets compromised while we're waiting for paperwork, it's going to look bad for your cooperation level. These things have a way of affecting business licenses and supplier relationships." There it was, the threat delivered with a smile. Priya's phone was in her pocket, set to record audio. She'd started at the moment the man walked in, following Renee's advice from a quick call that morning. I appreciate your concern, but I'm going to follow proper procedure. When I receive official documentation, I'll comply fully. The fixer's expression hardened. You're making a mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. He left without another word, but not before Priya noticed him glance at the DVR unit, calculating angles and access points. She watched him through the window as he walked to a dark sedan parked half a block down, pulled out his phone, and made a call. She immediately texted Bennett. Someone just tried to take the DVR without paperwork. Said it was for police investigation. I refused. He threatened my business license and supplier contracts. Bennett's response was instant. Perfect. Stay in the store. Don't touch the DVR. Officers are on the way to secure it. 2 blocks away, in an unmarked vehicle, Bennett's trusted IA officer received the alert and drove toward the market. But Bennett had another unit positioned even closer, plain clothes, watching the back entrance. That evening, after the store closed at 8 p.m., Priya received a phone call from an unknown number. She let it go to voicemail, and when she played it back, the message chilled her blood. Ms. Desai, this is a courtesy warning. Businesses that file false statements to protect criminals don't tend to last very long in this community. Accidents happen. Supplier contracts get canceled. Health inspections find violations. I'd suggest you reconsider your position on the Carter case before you find yourself in a situation you can't recover from. The voice was calm, almost friendly, which somehow made it worse. Priya saved the voicemail and forwarded it to Bennett, then called Renee. I just got a threatening message. They're not even pretending anymore. Good, Renee said, and Priya heard the steel in her voice. That means they're scared. Scared people make mistakes, and we're going to document every single mistake they make. Daniel, listening on speaker, added, I'm arranging for a patrol car to do regular drive-bys near your store. No lights, no drama, just presence. You're not alone in this. Thank you. Priya's voice cracked slightly. I didn't think standing up would feel this hard. It shouldn't have to be, but the fact that you're doing it anyway, that's courage. The next evening, the trap sprung in a way none of them expected. Priya closed her store at 8 p.m., completing her usual routine. Cash drawer balanced, receipts filed, lights dimmed. She was in the back office, finishing paperwork, when she heard the front door's lock mechanism click. Someone was entering. She froze, her heart racing. The store was closed. She'd locked that door herself. Voices drifted from the front. 2 men speaking in low tones. She recognized one immediately, Officer Kincaid. The other was Daryl Sykes. Priya's hands shook as she reached under her desk, where she'd set up a small digital recorder earlier that day, following Bennett's instructions. She pressed record, the tiny red LED confirming it was capturing audio. She took a breath and walked toward the front of the store, her footsteps announcing her presence. Both men turned, and Kincaid's expression shifted from surprise to something that resembled confidence, as if he'd expected this, planned for it. Ms. Desai, sorry to drop by after hours. The door was unlocked. The lie was smooth, practiced. I locked it myself. Priya's voice was steadier than she felt. Must not have caught properly. Old buildings, old locks. Kincaid gestured to Sykes. Mr. Sykes wanted to have a conversation with you. Clarify a few things about your statement. Sykes stepped forward, setting a printed document on the counter. Ms. Desai, I think there's been some confusion about what you witnessed. This is an affidavit that simply states you were mistaken about the timeline and that the young man appeared agitated when Officer Kincaid arrived. Just sign here, and we can put this whole misunderstanding behind us. Priya stared at the paper. You want me to lie? I want you to correct an honest mistake. Memory is unreliable under stress. That's a scientific fact. You might think you remember one sequence of events, but the physical evidence tells a different story. What physical evidence? Kincaid produced a small evidence bag from his jacket pocket. Inside was a battery pack and a receipt stub, but the timestamp was smudged and the format didn't match her store's POS system. This is what we recovered from a scene. It tells a different story than the one you've been promoting. The word promoting landed with deliberate weight, an accusation disguised as observation. Where did you get that? That's not from my store. Evidence collection is an ongoing process. Sometimes items are discovered during follow-up searches. Kincaid moved slightly, positioning the evidence bag near her POS terminal. The important thing is that we're trying to protect you from making a false statement that could have legal consequences. Sykes leaned against the counter, his tone shifting to something more casual, almost friendly. Look, I get it. You want to help a kid you think got a raw deal. That's admirable. But the bigger picture here is about community safety. We're trying to get funding for programs that will actually help these kids, job training, mentorship, educational support. The grant language requires documented intervention opportunities. That's all this is. Paperwork. It's how the grant language reads, Sykes continued, warming to his explanation. Community safety funds require data, documented incidents, intervention attempts, outcomes. Without the numbers, we can't secure the resources these neighborhoods need. Priya stalled, trying to absorb what she was hearing while keeping them talking. So you're saying Caleb's arrest is just data collection? In a sense, yes. Not malicious, strategic. Sometimes you need to spotlight problems to secure the solutions. Sykes smiled, apparently pleased with his own rhetoric. From her position near the office doorway, Priya could see the small recorder's LED blinking steadily beneath the counter, capturing every word. She needed them to say more, to make their intentions explicitly clear. What about the line in this affidavit that says organized juvenile ring? What does that mean? That's just grant terminology. Youth Safety Initiative funding requires categorization of threat levels. Organized ring qualifies for Tier 2 intervention resources, which means more money, better programming. Sykes spoke as if explaining basic math to a child. Kincaid shifted his weight, clearly less comfortable with how much Sykes was revealing. The point is, we're offering you a chance to be part of the solution. Sign a statement, and we move forward. Your store gets listed as a community partner in the grant application, which looks good for your business. And if I don't sign, the temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Kincaid's jaw tightened. Then we have to question why you're obstructing a legitimate investigation. False statements, interference with police business. These are serious charges. I haven't made any false statements. Not yet. But refusing to correct obvious errors starts to look like something else. Kincaid's hand moved near his belt, a subtle gesture of authority. Ms. Desai, I don't think you understand how much pressure you're under. Your supplier. You're 3 months behind on payments, right? Word is they're considering dropping your account. Be a shame if that happened. Small businesses like this, they don't recover from losing their primary distributor. There it was. The threat barely veiled. Sykes added, Hale wants numbers before Friday. You know the drill. The words hung in the air, specific, damning, connecting Councilman Hale directly to the pressure campaign. Priya's mind raced. She needed to signal distress, but subtly. Her hand moved toward the paperclip Bennett had told her to keep under the counter during their earlier conversation. A simple gesture, reaching for it, would trigger the response they'd planned. But before she could complete the motion, the front door opened. Police. Everyone keep your hands visible. Lieutenant Bennett stepped inside, followed by 2 IA officers, all wearing body cams that were clearly activated and recording. Bennett's voice was calm, authoritative. Officer Kincaid, Mr. Sykes, we're conducting an investigation into potential evidence tampering and witness intimidation. I need both of you to step away from the counter. Kincaid's face went pale, then flushed with anger. Lieutenant, this is a misunderstanding. I heard what you were doing, and it's all being recorded. Bennett nodded to her tech officer, who was already photographing the evidence bag on the counter, the affidavit, the angles of the room. Sykes held up his hands in a placating gesture. This is just a routine follow-up. We were clarifying Ms. Desai's statement to ensure accuracy. At 8:30 at night, after hours, in a locked building, while pressuring her to sign a document that contradicts her original testimony, Bennett's tone could have cut glass. That's not clarification. That's coercion. One of the IA officers moved to secure the evidence bag, photographing its position on the counter before touching it. Ma'am, Whose evidence is this? Not mine, Priya said quickly. They brought it with them. That's not from my store. Kincaid started to speak, then thought better of it. His hand moved toward his body cam, and Bennett caught the motion. Don't even think about it, Kincaid. Your camera stays on. In fact, I'm issuing a Garrity warning right now. You're under administrative investigation for potential policy violations. Anything you say can be used in that investigation. Do you understand? I want a union rep. That's your right. But you're not leaving until we've secured this scene and collected statements. Bennett turned to Priya. Ms. Desai, are you all right? I am now. Priya reached under the counter and lifted the small recorder, pressing stop. The timestamp glowed on its tiny screen. 23 minutes and 14 seconds of audio. And I have everything, they said. Bennett smiled, a rare expression that held no warmth, only satisfaction. We'll take that into evidence. Thank you for your courage. Sykes's confident demeanor cracked. I was just explaining program protocols. There's no crime in attempting to coerce a witness to sign a false statement, in planting evidence, in threatening someone's livelihood to obstruct justice. Bennett ticked off each charge on her fingers. I think we'll let the district attorney decide what constitutes a crime here. Outside, through the store's front window, a dark sedan pulled up. Councilman Hale's fixer, the man in the ball cap, returning to check on the operation. He took one look at the IA officers, the body cams, the way Kincaid and Sykes stood frozen, and immediately drove away. But Bennett's officers had already photographed his plates. Bag and tag everything, Bennett ordered. The affidavit, the planted evidence bag, photographs of the scene. I want chain of custody documented for every single item. She looked at Kincaid, a disappointment evident. You're going home, pending review. Badge and weapon now. Kincaid's hands shook as he surrendered his equipment. The reality of his situation was finally settling in. The comfortable certainty of authority had evaporated, leaving only exposure and consequence. Sykes tried one last deflection. I think you'll find that everything we did was within the scope of the Youth Safety Initiative's operational parameters. Councilman Hale can verify. Then I look forward to asking Councilman Hale about those parameters under oath. Bennett's tone made it clear that conversation would be happening sooner rather than later. As IA officers escorted Kincaid and Sykes out to separate vehicles, Priya sank onto the stool behind her counter, adrenaline finally giving way to exhaustion. Bennett approached, her expression softening. You did exactly right. The recording is crucial, and your refusal to be intimidated just closed half our case. I was terrified. I know. That's what makes it brave. Bennett handed her a business card. This is my direct line. If anyone contacts you, and I mean anyone, you call me immediately. Priya nodded, clutching the card like a lifeline. Outside, Bennett pulled out her phone and called Daniel. We've got them. Kincaid and Sykes walked into the trap exactly as you predicted. Attempted witness tampering, evidence planting, direct threats, and Sykes mentioned Hale by name and connection with needing numbers by Friday. Please tell me it's all recorded. Every word. Both Priya's device and our body cams. It's airtight. Daniel allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Then it's time to move on Hale. If Sykes mentioned him directly, that's our link to the top of the conspiracy. Already ahead of you. I got officers positioned outside his office and his home. If he tries to destroy evidence or run, we'll know. As Bennett ended the call, she stood in the quiet market and allowed herself to feel the weight of what they'd just accomplished. It wasn't over. The legal process would take months, maybe years. But the machinery of justice had finally engaged, and it was moving in the right direction. Inside the store, Priya locked the door behind the officers, this time checking it twice, and walked to her back office. She opened her laptop and began typing an email to every small business owner she knew in the neighborhood. The subject line read, "We don't have to be afraid anymore." And for the first time in days, she believed it. The evidence locker at the police station had never felt so crowded. Lieutenant Bennett stood before a metal shelf lined with sealed bags, each tagged and photographed with meticulous care. The store recorder sat in bag number 1, its audio file already copied to 3 separate drives with hash verification to prove nothing had been altered. The planted evidence bag occupied space too. Its contents, a battery pack and forged receipt. Already flagged, Bennett's tech specialist, a quiet man named Robert Shun, adjusted his glasses as he pulled up a comparison on his laptop. The timestamp format on the planted receipt uses a 12-hour clock with AM/PM designation. Ms. Desai's POS system exclusively uses 24-hour military time. Whoever created this didn't do their homework. Sloppy, Bennett muttered, making notes. What else? The battery pack has a security tag attached that doesn't match any inventory system in the city. I ran the serial number. It was reported stolen from a warehouse in Middleton 3 months ago. Someone's been keeping a stash of evidence ready to deploy. Bennett's phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. Olivia finished the donor network analysis. Hale's coalition received $340,000 in federal youth safety grants last year. Sykes's nonprofit was the primary contractor. Expenditure reports show 73% went to administrative costs with minimal documented program outcomes. She typed back, "That's embezzlement dressed up as community service. How do we prove the incidents were manufactured to justify the grants?" Working on it. We need someone inside to flip. Bennett looked at the evidence bags again, thinking. Sykes was polished but arrogant. Kincaid was cornered but loyal to self-preservation. The fixer was a ghost, probably experienced enough to stay silent. But there was another thread to pull. The kids who'd been coerced into participating. She called the Juvenile Records Division. Pull files on any teen associated with Sykes's Youth Opportunity Network in the past year. Cross-reference with shoplifting charges that were later dropped or diverted. I want names. 20 minutes later, she had a list of 7 names. One jumped out immediately. Marcus Williams, the former robotics club member Caleb, had identified in Kincaid's interrogation photo. That afternoon, Daniel and Renee sat with Marcus and his mother, Linda Williams, in a community center conference room that smelled of pine cleaner and old coffee. Marcus slouched in his chair, his hoodie pulled up despite the warmth of the room, his eyes fixed on the table. Linda sat beside him, her hands folded tightly, her expression caught between anger and fear. "Marcus isn't a criminal," Linda said before anyone else could speak. "He made mistakes, but he was manipulated. We believe that," Renee said gently, her voice carrying the warmth she used with struggling students. "We're not here to prosecute Marcus. We're here to understand what happened so we can stop it from happening to other kids." Marcus glanced up briefly, then away. "Why should I trust you?" "Because I'm Caleb Carter's mother, and Caleb remembers you from Robotics Club. He said you were good at programming logic gates." Something flickered in Marcus's expression. Surprise, maybe, or shame. "Caleb was better. Way better. He misses having you in the club," Renee continued. "He said you left suddenly. Can you tell us why?" Marcus's jaw worked, his internal struggle visible. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "My mom lost her job. We needed money. This guy, Mr. Sykes, he came to school doing some presentation about opportunities. Afterward, he pulled me aside, said he could help me earn cash doing community research." "What kind of research?" Daniel asked, keeping his tone neutral, non-threatening. "He gave me a list of stores and specific times to be there. Said I should browse, pick up small items, nothing expensive, and pocket them when nobody was looking. He said it was for tracking security gaps, helping businesses improve their systems." Marcus's voice cracked. "I didn't want to steal, but he said it wasn't real stealing because we were helping and he'd pay me $50 per session." Linda's eyes filled with tears. "Baby, why didn't you tell me?" "Because we needed the money, Mom. And he said if I told anyone, I'd get charged for real and you'd lose the apartment." Renee leaned forward, her expression compassionate but firm. "Marcus, did Officer Kincaid ever show up during these sessions?" "Yeah, every time, like within 5 minutes of me pocketing something. At first I thought it was bad luck. Then I realized Sykes was texting someone right before I went in." Marcus finally met Renee's eyes. "It was a setup, wasn't it? They were using me to make arrest statistics." "Yes," Daniel said simply. "You were part of a scheme to inflate crime numbers for grant funding. And you're not alone. We believe there are other kids who were coerced the same way." "What happens to me now?" Marcus's voice trembled. That depends on your cooperation, Daniel said. If you're willing to testify about what Sykes asked you to do, provide documentation of the payments, and identify the stores you were sent to, the district attorney can offer immunity. You be a witness, not a defendant. Marcus looked at his mother. She squeezed his hand. Tell them everything. For the next hour, Marcus detailed a system that was both simple and insidious. Sykes would identify vulnerable kids, those with financial stress, family problems, or academic struggles, and offer them opportunities that were really just scripted criminal acts. The kids would follow the script, Kincaid would arrive on cue, and the arrest would generate paperwork that fed into grant applications. Most charges were later dropped or diverted through Sykes' own program, creating a closed loop that looked like successful intervention. He kept calling it helping the community, Marcus said bitterly. So we were spotlighting problems so they could get resources to fix them. I believed him because I wanted to believe someone cared about neighborhoods like mine. Daniel made detailed notes, his anger carefully controlled. This wasn't just corruption, it was predation, targeting the most vulnerable and weaponizing their desperation. When they finished, Renee handed Marcus a card. This is my office number at the university. If you ever want to talk about anything, you call. And Marcus? What Sykes did to you wasn't your fault. You were surviving. But now you get to be part of making sure he can't do it to anyone else. Marcus nodded, pocketing the card with hands that shook less than they had an hour ago. Outside the community center, Daniel called ADA Claire Whitman. We got a witness. Kid who will testify to the entire scheme. Recruitment, payment, coordination with Kincaid, the works. He can tie Sykes directly to manufactured incidents. Give me a formal statement, and I'll bring charges, Claire said, her voice carrying the sharp edge of someone who'd been lied to and didn't appreciate it. Conspiracy to commit fraud, tampering with public records, official misconduct, civil rights deprivation. I want all of it. What about Hale? Working on it. Sykes mentioned him on the recording, but a good defense attorney will argue it was out of context. I need financial records showing Hale directed funds based on inflated statistics. Can your FBI colleague pull that? She's already digging. Give her until tomorrow morning. Fine. But I want everything ready for Friday. If Hale's doing a grant press conference, I want charges filed before he steps to that podium. That evening, Olivia Grant sat in her FBI field office, surrounded by printouts and spreadsheets that told a story of systematic fraud. The financial trail was surprisingly clean on the surface. Properly filed tax documents, audited expenditure reports, legitimate-looking invoices. But when she cross-referenced the grant application timelines with Kincaid's arrest records and the business locations, the pattern emerged like a photograph developing in solution. Every grant milestone correlated with a spike in documented juvenile incidents. Every funding increase followed a presentation highlighting community safety needs backed by statistics that Kincaid and others had manufactured. And every dollar that flowed through Sykes' nonprofit ended up enriched by administrative fees that funded Hale's political operation. She created a visual presentation, a timeline with 3 parallel tracks showing grants, arrests, and political donations. The correlation was undeniable. She encrypted the file and sent it to Daniel with a message, Exhibit A for the prosecution. This is what systemic corruption looks like when you follow the money. Back at the Carter home, Caleb sat with Theo in the living room, reviewing footage one more time. They'd refined the presentation, adding timestamps and labels, stripping out anything that felt like editorializing. The goal wasn't to create viral content. It was to create evidence that would hold up under legal scrutiny. Do you think it'll be enough? Theo asked. I think the truth is enough, Caleb said quietly. We just have to make sure people can see it clearly. Theo nodded, saving the final cut to a secure drive. When this is over, you're coming back to film club, right? We're doing a documentary unit next month. Caleb smiled for the first time in days. Yeah, I think I've got some ideas about what makes a good documentary now. Meanwhile, across town in his downtown office, Councilman Victor Hale reviewed his presentation for the Friday press conference. Slide 7 still displayed the chart showing increased juvenile incident documentation, the success metrics that justified another year of funding. He'd invited television crews, print reporters, even a few friendly bloggers who could be counted on for positive coverage. His phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. He ignored it. 3 more calls came in rapid succession, all from numbers he didn't recognize. Finally, he answered. "Councilman Hale, this is Lieutenant Nora Bennett with Internal Affairs. I need to inform you that you're being included in an active investigation into grant fraud and civil rights violations. I'd like to schedule a voluntary interview at your earliest convenience." Hale's practiced calm wavered. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're referring to, Lieutenant. My office cooperates fully with law enforcement, but I'll need more specifics before. We have recordings of your associate, Daryl Sykes, referencing your direct involvement in pressuring for incident documentation to support grant applications. We also have financial records showing suspicious correlations between manufactured arrests and funding milestones. I strongly suggest you consult with legal counsel. This is absurd. I run community improvement initiatives, nothing more." "Then I'm sure your records will reflect that. I'll be in touch to schedule that interview. Have a good evening, Councilman." The line went dead. Hale sat in silence for a long moment, then opened his laptop and began searching through files, looking for anything that might be problematic. His calendar showed the Friday fundraiser with out-of-town donors, people who'd contributed specifically because of his innovative youth safety programs. If those programs were exposed as fraudulent, the political fallout would be catastrophic. He called his attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Vance who specialized in white-collar defense. "Patricia, we have a situation." The next morning, Thursday, ADA Whitman sat in her office with Lieutenant Bennett, reviewing the complete evidence package. Priya's audio recording, Theo's video analysis, Marcus's statement, Olivia's financial correlation charts, the planted evidence forensics. It all painted a comprehensive picture of coordinated corruption. "This is one of the ugliest cases I've seen," Claire said, flipping through the documentation. "Not because of the violence or drama, but because of how calculated it was. They weaponized the justice system against children for profit. Can you get charges approved by tomorrow morning?" Bennett asked. "For Kincaid and Sykes, absolutely. For Hale, I need one more piece, direct communication showing he ordered the incident manufacturing. Everything we have is circumstantial connection. A good attorney will argue he was unaware of the methods his contractors used. What if we let him think he's still in control? Let the press conference proceed. See if he incriminates himself." Claire considered it. Risky. If he's smart, he'll cancel or have attorneys scrub every word of his speech. But if we apply just enough pressure, make him think he needs to defend himself publicly, he might overplay his hand. "You're suggesting we bait him into a trap." "I'm suggesting we give him enough rope to demonstrate his own guilt." Bennett pulled out her phone. "Daniel Carter has resources we don't. FBI surveillance capability, electronic monitoring. If Hale tries to coordinate with Sykes or others before the press conference, we'll know." Claire smiled grimly. "Do it, but make sure everything's legal and documented. I won't risk the case on procedural violations." That afternoon, Daniel coordinated with Olivia to position bureau assets around City Hall and the surrounding blocks. 2 surveillance teams with directional microphones, 3 plainclothes officers with body cameras, and cellular metadata collection equipment that would capture any texts or calls made near the press conference location. "This feels like we're staging a federal operation for a municipal fraud case," Olivia noted. "This stopped being just municipal fraud when they started violating civil rights systematically. That makes it a federal case if we want it to be." Daniel reviewed the positioning map on his tablet. "Besides, I have a personal interest in making sure this doesn't get buried. How's Caleb handling all this?" "Better than I expected. His mother's been coaching him through the stress, teaching him about systems and how change happens. I think he's going to come out of this stronger." "Good. Kids shouldn't have to be strong in the face of this kind of corruption, but I'm glad he has support." Friday morning arrived with clear skies and unseasonably warm weather. City Hall's front steps had been set up with a podium, microphones, and banners reading Community Safety Initiative, Year 2 Success. Television crews positioned cameras, reporters checked audio levels, and a small crowd gathered, some curious citizens, some community activists who'd been invited as props for the presentation. Among the crowd stood Caleb, with Theo beside him and Renee just behind. Daniel had wanted them to stay away, but Caleb had insisted. "I won't be invisible in my own story," he'd said. "If this is about me, I should be there." Renee had agreed, with conditions. They stayed near a plainclothes IA officer. They didn't engage with media, and they left immediately if things got dangerous. Near the pharmacy 2 blocks down, a teenager named Kevin Porter, another kid on Sykes' recruitment list, received a text. "Need you at the pharmacy. Grab something small from the impulse aisle near checkout. Do it at 10:15 exactly. Camera crew will help with the demonstration. $75. Kevin stared at the message, his stomach churning. He'd participated twice before, both times ending with Officer Kincaid arriving and going through the motions of an arrest that later got dismissed. The pattern had become clear. This wasn't legitimate work, it was a performance. But the money was real, and his family needed it. He walked toward the pharmacy, his phone clutched in his hand. At City Hall, Hale stepped to the podium at exactly 10 a.m., flanked by Daryl Sykes and 2 council members who'd co-sponsored the grant initiative. Cameras rolled as Hale launched into his prepared remarks. "Good morning. Today marks a pivotal moment in our community's commitment to youth safety and opportunity. Over the past year, through the dedicated work of community partners like Daryl Sykes and the brave officers of our police department, we've documented a 37% increase in intervention opportunities for at-risk youth." The words flowed smoothly, each sentence carefully crafted to sound compassionate and data-driven. Hale gestured to a poster board displaying graphs and statistics, all built on the foundation of manufactured incidents. In the crowd, Theo's gimbal captured everything. Not just Hale's speech, but the crowd's reaction, the body language of the officials on the platform, the way Sykes kept checking his phone. 2 blocks away, Kevin entered the pharmacy. His heart pounded as he walked to the impulse aisle, his eyes scanning for the small items that would be easiest to pocket. A travel-sized deodorant caught his attention. Small, cheap, perfect for the script he'd been given. He reached for it, then stopped. On the television mounted near the pharmacy counter, the local news was broadcasting Hale's press conference live. Kevin saw the councilman gesturing broadly, talking about intervention and opportunity, and something inside him broke. This was what his petty thefts were funding, political theater built on lies. He set the deodorant back on the shelf and walked out of the pharmacy. At City Hall, 2 men in dark suits moved through the crowd toward the steps. They were plainclothes officers, but their bearing made them obvious to anyone paying attention. They positioned themselves near the teenager who'd been shepherded toward the event by Sykes' associates. A nervous kid who kept looking at his phone, clearly waiting for instructions. Lieutenant Bennett, watching from a position near the side entrance, spoke quietly into her radio. "Subjects have identified a potential staged incident participant. Officers are intercepting now." On the podium, Hale continued his speech, unaware of the operation unfolding around him. "These programs require resources, commitment, and most importantly, accurate documentation of community needs. That's why I'm proud to announce that we're seeking expanded federal funding for Year 2, building on the documented success." A reporter near the front raised her hand, interrupting. "Councilman Hale, can you comment on reports that some of the juvenile incidents cited in your grant applications were staged?" Hale paused, his confident smile wavering. "I'm sorry, I don't understand the question." "There are allegations that Officer Brad Kincaid and Youth Coordinator Daryl Sykes coordinated to manufacture arrest statistics. Are you aware of these allegations?" The murmur in the crowd grew louder. Hale glanced at Sykes, whose face had gone pale. "Those allegations are completely unfounded," Hale said, recovering his composure. "Our programs operate with full transparency and in compliance with all grant requirements. If there have been procedural concerns, they will be addressed through proper channels, but I can assure you." "Can you explain why your grant applications show incident spikes that correlate exactly with funding milestone deadlines?" The reporter, a woman Daniel had quietly briefed that morning, pulled out a printed chart. and why expenditure reports show 73% administrative costs with minimal documented program outcomes. Hale's jaw tightened. These are complex programs with necessary operational expenses. Administrative costs cover coordination, reporting, oversight. They cover political donations, don't they? The reporter pressed forward, ignoring the attempts of Hale's communications director to intervene. Financial records show that Daryl Sykes' nonprofit made substantial contributions to your campaign fund within days of receiving grant disbursements. Sykes started to back away from the podium, but Bennett's officers had already moved to block the exits. ADA Claire Whitman stepped forward from the crowd, her credentials visible on a lanyard around her neck. "Councilman Hale, I'm Assistant District Attorney Claire Whitman. I have warrants for the arrest of Daryl Sykes and Officer Brad Kincaid on charges of conspiracy to commit fraud, evidence tampering, civil rights violations, and witness intimidation. I'd like you to postpone this event and accompany me to answer questions about your involvement in these activities." The cameras captured everything. Hale's face transitioning from confidence to confusion to barely controlled panic. Sykes attempting to disappear into the crowd only to be stopped by officers. The banners proclaiming success, hanging ironically behind a scene of exposure. Hale tried one last deflection. "This is politically motivated harassment. I've done nothing wrong. My programs have helped this community. Your programs exploited vulnerable children to generate false statistics for profit," Claire said, her voice cutting through the noise. "We have recordings, witness testimony, financial records, and video evidence. If you cooperated with these schemes, you will be charged. If you were genuinely unaware, then your records will prove that. Either way, this press conference is over." Daniel stepped forward from his position in the crowd, finally revealing his presence. He didn't flash his badge, didn't announce his title, just spoke in a voice that carried absolute authority. "Councilman, you mentioned that you wanted numbers by Friday. That was recorded during an intimidation attempt on a witness. Would you like to explain what numbers you were referring to?" Hale's expression collapsed. He recognized Daniel from the police station, realized he'd underestimated who he was dealing with. "I'd like to speak with my attorney." "That's wise," Daniel said, "because what you're facing isn't just municipal charges. Federal civil rights violations carry significant penalties." Kincaid, who'd been lurking at the edge of the crowd hoping to remain unnoticed, suddenly bolted for the south stairs. He made it 3 steps before running directly into 2 FBI agents Olivia had positioned as a precaution. They didn't tackle him, just stood immovable, their credentials visible, their expressions leaving no room for negotiation. "Officer Kincaid," one of them said calmly, "we have questions about communications on your phone relating to coordinated civil rights violations. We'd like you to come with us." Kincaid's shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him. "You're FBI," he said, the realization hitting him with visible weight. "Yes, sir. And your phone is now evidence in a federal investigation." In the crowd, Caleb watched the scene unfold with a mixture of vindication and exhaustion. Theo's gimbal captured every moment, not for sensationalism, but for documentation. This was history, the moment when a system that had run unchecked finally faced accountability. Renee put her hand on Caleb's shoulder. "How are you feeling?" "Like I can breathe again," Caleb said quietly. The television crews, initially invited to cover a celebration, instead broadcast the unraveling of a criminal enterprise. By noon, every local station was running the story. By evening, national outlets had picked it up. The press conference that was supposed to secure another year of funding instead became the public exposure of systematic corruption. And as the crowd dispersed and officers began the long process of collecting evidence and securing the scene, one truth became clear. The people who'd weaponized justice for profit had finally faced justice themselves. The interrogation rooms at the FBI field office were quieter than their police station counterparts, with better soundproofing and air that didn't smell like decades of stress and bad coffee. In room 3, forensic analysts worked through Officer Brad Kincaid's phone with surgical precision, recovering text that painted a damning timeline. A message from 3 weeks ago. "Hale needs numbers for the quarterly report." Can you work the Maple Street corridor tomorrow? Another from 2 days before Caleb's arrest. Target the market on 5th. Owners behind on payments. Make it visible. And dozens more, each one a breadcrumb leading directly to coordination between Kincaid, Sykes, and the councilman's office. The deletions had been careless, removed from the visible thread but still cached in the phone's backup system. SSA Olivia Grant presented the recovered messages to ADA Claire Whitman in a secure conference room, each text displayed on a large monitor with timestamps and metadata. We've also pulled Kincaid's cloud backup. There's a folder labeled Diversions with spreadsheets tracking arrest locations, dates, and corresponding grant milestones. He was essentially keeping score. Claire leaned back in her chair, shaking her head. He documented his own crimes. Some criminals really do make our jobs easier. The question is whether he'll flip on Hale, Olivia said. He's facing federal civil rights charges, evidence tampering, conspiracy. That's 20 years minimum if he goes to trial and loses. Then let's make sure he understands his options. In room 5, Daryl Sykes sat across from his attorney, a public defender who looked overwhelmed by the scope of the case. Sykes had maintained his composure for the first hour, insisting everything he'd done was within the bounds of program administration. But when Claire entered with a folder containing Priya's audio recording, his confidence evaporated. She pressed play. Sykes' own voice filled the room. Hale wants numbers before Friday. You know the drill. The attorney closed his eyes. Mr. Sykes, I need to speak with my client privately. 15 minutes later, they emerged with a proposal. Sykes would provide complete documentation of the scheme, recruitment methods, payment records, email chains with Hale, in exchange for reduced charges and a sentencing recommendation of probation with community service. Claire considered it. I want testimony, full cooperation, every meeting, every payment, every directive from Hale. And I want you to identify every child who was coerced into participating. He'll do it, the attorney said quickly, before Sykes could reconsider. Then we have a deal. But if I find out you've held anything back, the deal evaporates and you face the maximum. Sykes nodded, his polished confidence replaced by the haggard acceptance of someone who'd run out of moves. Down the hall, Kincaid faced a different calculation. His attorney, a sharp criminal defense lawyer named Tom Brennan, had reviewed the evidence and delivered the assessment bluntly. Brad, they have you on everything. The texts, the body cam gaps, the planted evidence, the witness intimidation. If you go to trial, you're looking at conviction on all counts. Federal prison, minimum 20 years, probably more. What are my options? Kincaid's voice was hollow. You cooperate. You testify against Hale and anyone else involved in directing this operation. You allocate to every charge. In exchange, the prosecution recommends 15 years with possibility of parole after 10. That's still my life. The alternative is dying in prison. Your choice. Kincaid sat in silence for a long moment, then nodded. I'll take the deal. Within 48 hours, the prosecution had built an airtight case against Councilman Victor Hale. Sykes' testimony provided the strategic framework, how Hale had designed the grant applications with inflated metrics, how he directed which neighborhoods to target, how he'd personally approved the recruitment of vulnerable teenagers. Kincaid's testimony filled in the operational details, specific incidents, coordinated timing, the techniques used to manufacture probable cause. But the most powerful evidence came from the teenagers themselves. Marcus Williams, Kevin Porter, and 3 others sat with Claire and provided statements that were heartbreaking in their simplicity. They've been offered help and given exploitation. They've been promised opportunity and delivered trauma. We thought someone finally cared about our neighborhoods, Marcus said during his recorded statement. Turned out they just wanted to use us as props for their funding pitches. Claire filed charges against Hale 2 weeks after the press conference. Conspiracy to commit fraud, tampering with public records, official misconduct, civil rights deprivation, and wire fraud for using electronic communications to coordinate the scheme. The indictment ran 43 pages, each count supported by multiple forms of evidence. Hale's attorney, Patricia Vance, attempted to negotiate, but Claire had no interest. Your client weaponized the justice system against children for profit. There's no deal that makes that acceptable. We're going to trial. The trial itself took 6 weeks. The prosecution methodically built their case, calling witness after witness. Priya Desai testified about the intimidation and the planted evidence. Lieutenant Bennett walked the jury through the body cam audit, showing the pattern of gaps that coincided with questionable arrests. Olivia presented the financial analysis, demonstrating the direct correlation between manufactured incidents and funding milestones. Marcus and the other teenagers testified about their recruitment, their voices steady despite their obvious discomfort. The jury listened with expressions that ranged from shock to anger to sadness. Theo's video analysis played on courtroom monitors, showing Kincaid's deliberate body cam positioning. The timestamps were irrefutable, the pattern undeniable. When Caleb took the stand, he spoke with the same calm precision he'd maintained throughout the ordeal. He described the events at the market in factual detail, never exaggerating, never editorializing. His credibility was unshakable. "Did you steal those batteries?" Claire asked. "No, ma'am. I purchased them. I had the receipt until it fell under the rack." "And how did Officer Kincaid's accusation make you feel?" "Scared, angry, confused about why he wouldn't listen to the truth." Caleb paused, but also determined to make sure it was documented properly so it couldn't happen to someone else. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty. Hale's face remained impassive as the verdict was read, but his hands trembled slightly when the judge set a sentencing date for 6 weeks later. During those 6 weeks, the community began the slower work of repair. The police department, under pressure from both the mayor and public outcry, announced comprehensive reforms. Body cams would now require continuous recording during all public interactions, with automatic supervisor review triggered by any gap in footage. Grant-funded programs would undergo third-party audits with transparent metrics published quarterly. A civilian oversight board would review all juvenile arrests. Lieutenant Bennett was promoted to Deputy Chief of Integrity, a newly created position with authority to investigate any officer suspected of misconduct. Her first action was to audit the records of 2 other officers who'd shown similar patterns to Kincaid. Both were suspended pending investigation. At the district attorney's office, Claire Whitman established a community evidence integrity task force, bringing together law enforcement, business owners, and community advocates to ensure accountability in how cases were built and prosecuted. Priya Desai accepted a position on the advisory board, using her experience to help other small business owners understand their rights and responsibilities. "I never wanted to be an activist," Priya told the task force during their first meeting. "I just wanted to run my store. But silence in the face of injustice is complicity, and I won't be complicit anymore." The room responded with applause that felt more like solidarity than celebration. A local coalition, organized by neighbors who'd watched the press conference footage online, raised money to cover Priya's outstanding supplier debt. The fund exceeded its goal within 3 days, and the excess was directed to a scholarship program for students interested in criminal justice reform. Priya updated her store signage, adding a small notice near the register: "We believe receipts and people." It became something of a neighborhood symbol, a quiet declaration that dignity and truth mattered more than convenience or profit. 6 weeks after the verdict, the courtroom filled again for sentencing. Kincaid, having accepted his plea agreement, received 15 years with eligibility for parole after 10. Sykes, having provided substantial cooperation, received 5 years with credit for time served and 3 years of supervised probation. His nonprofit was dissolved, its remaining assets transferred to legitimate youth programs. Hale stood before the judge with his attorney beside him, his political career already destroyed by media coverage and public outrage. His fundraiser had been canceled, his donors had fled, and 2 recall petitions were circulating with overwhelming signature support. The judge, a stern woman named Margaret Lawson who'd spent 30 years on the bench, addressed him directly. "Mr. Hale, you held a position of public trust, and you violated it in the most cynical way possible. You identified vulnerable children and used them as tools to enrich yourself and your political operation. You corrupted the justice system that is meant to protect all citizens equally. The damage you've caused extends far beyond the specific victims in this case. You've undermined public faith in institutions that are essential to a functioning democracy. She sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison, with no possibility of early release. The courtroom was silent except for the quiet sound of someone crying. One of the recruited teenagers, finally releasing emotions he'd held for months. Outside the courthouse, Daniel stood with Caleb and Renee, watching as news crews captured reactions from community members who'd gathered to witness the sentencing. He'd stayed in the background throughout the trial, not wanting his FBI credentials to overshadow the local prosecution, but his work had been essential to building the case. "How are you doing?" he asked Caleb quietly. "I'm okay. It feels like it's finally over. The legal part is over. The harder work, rebuilding trust, changing systems, that takes longer." Daniel put his hand on his son's shoulder. "But today matters. Today proves that accountability is possible." Renee added, "And you were part of making that happen. Not because of who your father is, but because you insisted on the truth and refused to be invisible." Caleb nodded, absorbing that validation. Theo wants to make a documentary about the whole thing for his film class. Not sensational, just factual. He's thinking about calling it Documented. "That's perfect," Renee said, "because that's what defeated them. Documentation. Not drama, not outrage, just careful, precise documentation of what actually happened." 3 months later, the community center hosted a STEM night that had been postponed during the trial. Caleb set up his robotics project at a table near the front. A small robot with a motion sensor that tracked movement only when the subject gave consent through a button press. It was a subtle lesson about ethics and technology, about the importance of permission and boundaries. Children gathered around his demonstration, their eyes wide with curiosity. Caleb explained the programming patiently, breaking down complex concepts in a language they could understand. When he activated the robot, its LED blinked green, not red, indicating consensual tracking. "Why green instead of red?" a young girl asked. "Because green means go, permission granted," Caleb explained. "Red means stop, boundary violated. Technology should respect people's choices, not override them." The girl nodded thoughtfully, and Caleb felt something shift inside him. This was how change happened, not just through trials and verdicts, but through teaching the next generation to think critically about power, consent, and justice. Across the room, Priya chatted with other business owners who'd joined the task force, sharing strategies for security and community cooperation that didn't rely on over-policing. Lieutenant Bennett, now Deputy Chief Bennett, spoke with a group of young people interested in law enforcement careers, explaining the reforms and why they mattered. Theo moved through the crowd with his camera, capturing footage for his documentary. He'd already interviewed Marcus, who was back in school and working toward a programming certification. He'd spoken with Priya about resilience and community. He'd documented the policy changes and the task force meetings. The final interview would be with Caleb, but not tonight. Tonight was about forward motion, about possibility, about demonstrating that systems could change when people refused to accept injustice as inevitable. Daniel and Renee stood at the back of the room, watching their son teach and inspire. "He's going to be okay," Renee said softly. "Better than okay," Daniel replied. "He's going to be someone who makes things better." Near the exit, Lieutenant Bennett received a notification on her phone. Her office had completed the audit of the 2 officers she'd flagged. Both showed patterns consistent with Kincaid's misconduct. She forwarded the report to ADA Whitman with a note. 2 more cases to build. The work continues. Claire's response came within minutes. "Let's do this right. Methodically. Documented." Bennett smiled. Documented. That had become the watchword for accountability, the standard that separated legitimate policing from abuse of power. It wasn't dramatic, but it was effective. As the STEM night wound down and families began to leave, Caleb packed up his robot carefully, wrapping the circuit boards in protective foam. A younger boy approached, shy but determined. "Can I join Robotics Club next year?" he asked. "I want to learn to build things." "Absolutely," Caleb said, handing him a flyer. "We meet Thursdays after school. Bring your curiosity, and we'll figure out the rest." The boy took the flyer like it was treasure and ran to show his mother. Outside, the evening air was cool and clear. Street lights illuminated the neighborhood in warm pools of light. The community center's sign glowed against the darkening sky, building tomorrow together. It wasn't a perfect ending because the work of justice is never finished. But it was a true ending, one built on accountability, repair, and the stubborn insistence that people matter more than power. Caleb walked to the car with his parents, his robot safely stored in his backpack, his mind already planning improvements to the consent protocol. He learned something fundamental over these months, that being believed shouldn't depend on a parent's job, that truth requires documentation, and that change happens when ordinary people refuse to accept corruption as normal. The LED on his robot, visible through the backpack's mesh pocket, blinked steady green. Permission granted. Boundaries respected. Justice, not as a destination, but as a practice, careful, documented, and always working towards something better. When systems of power abuse the most vulnerable among us, how many voices does it take to finally demand change? And are you willing to be one of them? If this story made you think, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about courage, justice, and the fight for what's right.